I was well on my way to being drunk when I first saw Penny Daye, and there have been moments since when I think that perhaps I should have finished the journey. It would not have spared me grief, and it would not have brought me absent luck, but had I done so, I am almost sure I would, though I not have seen the stones or the plain, and I would not have heard the wind and the voices it carries. Almost, not quite, had a number of what I had thought at the time were perfectly good excuses for that onset of inebriation. There were no real reasons were honesty forced upon me. That I was alone and in a strange country, low on funds and lower still on spirit, should not by themselves have tempted me into the Salisbury pub, but in concert with an afternoon more grey than light, more winter than fall, I was an easy prey for self-induced depression, easier prey still for dark bitter stout that was my substitution for lunch. I suppose I didn't make a very good impression on my English cousins that afternoon, but I rationalized it by reminding myself that I was actually a Scot, and therefore need not apologize for any discomfort that I caused the oppressors. Was American balm and bread made no difference to my then somewhat befuddled mind. That day I was a Scot, and made my silent toast across the water. It was well over an hour, I think, before I finally realized that if I didn't move soon, if I didn't get some fresh air and something solid in my stomach, I'd probably have to be carried to my train. The potential embarrassment stirred me, ancestral pride be damned, and I paid my bill and did my best not to stagger outside. The air was damp, too chilled by the wind for my light jacket and sweater, and I decided to head directly back to the station and punish my stupidity by sitting on a hard and cold British rail bench, fully exposed to the elements while I waited for transport back to London. I didn't, however, have all that far to go. The pub was just around the Commer and down a gentle slope from my destination, and as I made my way upward, stifling a few belches and grimacing at the sour aftertaste, I decided there had to be something hitched to my fate that was preventing me from seeing Stonehenge, only a few miles away. This was the second time I had made the journey, and the second time circumstance had prevented me from completing the not very long trip out to the stones. The first occasion was just over a year ago, when I was here with a companion who, on my more charitable days, I might have called my fiancée. She was not, if truth be known, all that interested in places officiable human sacrifice if sh couldn't at least see a bit oft-read blood, and she talked me at the last into a side trip to what she called a quaint, authentic market in the center of town, near the cathedral, where most of our allotted funds for the day were spent and soon forgotten. We barely did make the last train. She is long gone now, coping in California with a budding screenwriter, and though I had kidded myself about actually wanting to visit the ruins this time, I think it was merely one more way to flay myself for losing her, and to hate myself for not having the courage to do anything about it. Slowly then, with hands deep in my trouser pockets, I made my way morosely to the red brick station house, found the right track, and sat down, and saw her. She was on the platform opposite, silently standing apart from a group of young people in varying shades off leather, and those whose hair had been dyed several unnatural but undeniably attractive colors. They were singing boisterously. She was holding her hands in front of her, ignoring them and staring at me. At least I thought she was staring at me. Her coat was camel's hair, her scarf burgundy, her hat a black tarn prettily cocked on deep black hair. Though I leaned forward a bit and stared, I could not quite make out her features. It was as if the area had recently been swept through by a faint, disorienting fog. But I knew she was lovely, could see her well enough to make out the pinches offered at her full round cheeks. It was the drink that made me bold enough to smile. It must have been the drink that made me think she smiled back and nodded. Then one of those high-speed monsters blasted through the station, scattering dust and scraps off paper and forcing my eyes closed. The noise one off those trains makes is not unlike the prolonged clap of the sound barrier being shattered, and when it was gone and my eyes were open again, the place where she stood was empty. I got to my feet at once and moved towards the tracks. The kids were still there, but she was gone. I turned then toward the stairs. thinking rather hopefully that she had been attracted to me and had decided to join me, shaking my head at the conceited notion, yet straightening myself up all the same. She didn't come, and had not my own train arrived at just that moment, I think I would have gone in search of her. But there were meetings in the city I had to attend, business partners to appease for my recent lack of success, and ruffled feathers to be oiled down with flagrant promises and white lies. I needn't have worried. Saw her again 1 month later. It was 1 week from the end off my trip, and I didn't want to go back. I had seen enough of London, enough off country, to realize that the legendary British Reserve was no more a fact than the so-called cold indifference of New Yorkers. My business, if not my self-esteem, had been temporarily salvaged. My interest in history reawakened simply by walking through so much of it so well preserved, and I was, at the last, almost calling it home, even to the point of feeling disgusted whenever saw American tourists making bores off themselves. I was no longer a tourist, you see. I was fitting in, and I liked it. So I decided that I would, by God and damn the torpedoes, get back to Salisbury and see those damned stones. So I took the train, walked down the hill, and decided to have a pint to warm me up before catching the bus. Which I did, though it was more than one, and though it took me near to an hour before I started out again. And thus I was encased in a mellow, autumnal glow when I caught the bus, sat on the upper deck on the bench seat in front, and watched the town and countryside lurch past me as we headed for Salisbury Plain. Dozed a little. The bus's interior was quite warm. I listened to an elderly woman chiding her husband for forgetting something at the market. Her voice was strident, and we were the only ones up there. And I began to think that perhaps I wouldn't go home after all. To be honest, there wasn't much there for me to go back to: an apartment, an office, the infrequent evening excursion to dinner and to bed. It all seemed, suddenly, awfully bleak and weary. Then the bus ground gears over the crest of a low hill, and I leaned forward in my front seat and saw them. My first reaction was one of disappointment. In the movies and on the postcards, the monoliths appeared to be hundreds of feet high. They weren't, and the circle they described was considerably smaller than I had imagined. But as the roadway dipped and we approached the turnoff to the parking lot on our right, I felt it. Even on the clattering, fume-filled bus, I felt it quite strongly, a sense offage, a sense of melancholy, and I swear that a chill momentarily prickled along my arms. I couldn't wait to get off, and did so immediately the bus pulled over. There were a number of tourist coaches filling and several cars pulling out. The ringstones were on the other side off the highway, and one had to purchase a ticket here, then walk through a tunnel under the road to a ramp that led up to the monuments themselves. I stared dumbly at the ticket window. Closed, I said. How the hell can stone hinge be closed, for God's sake? The woman behind the glass smiled sadly and shrugged. Rules, she told me, were rules, and she couldn't let me pass. I turned my gaze from her to the tunnel, back again inside. The return bus to Salisbury was already gone, and Anna, wouldn't be along for well over an hour. Still, I told myself sternly, you're here and you might as well make the best of it, don't you think? So I walked up to the verge and looked over the other side. They were there, lying, tilting, standing, a worn path and a great arc around them, a rope, fenced to keep the souvenir hunters from taking their chips and gouges. I felt it again, age and melancholy, and the wind that danced continuously over the plain, rounding the ringstone's edges and flattening the low grass, putting voices in my ears that I could not understand. I imagine I made a rather forlorn picture, because a few minutes later a stout puffing man in a smart dark uniform and round cap came up beside me. He was much shorter than I, his face red and creased, and without a word he handed me a fat silver flask. Pity, he said, instinctively knowing my position. It's best to come here alone, too. You come in a group, there's all chattering and questions, and you can't get a true feel for what you see, if you know what I mean. I nodded. We introduced ourselves then, after another round off something that had no relation to brandy, but had the fire just the same. His name was Peter Jones, and he was a guide for the helpless who didn't know what they were looking at. We talked and we sipped, and we stared at the circle until, as the sky darkened and a fleet off black clouds massed on the horizon, he took my arm. I frowned. He winked and said that we can't have reporters all the way from America losing out on this last chance. Now can we? I grinned then and followed him down the incline, past the ticket booth and through the tunnel. No one stopped us, though someone, who might have been his boss, gave him a dark, disgusted look. By the time we climbed up the other side, we were alone. "Do you want the lecture, John Dalton?" he asked. Shook my head. He had spoken in a reverential whisper, and I knew why. This place, far larger, far more grand than the space it occupied, was more like a cathedral than any cathedral I'd ever been to. If I were so inclined, I would have said that the forces which had created it and sustained it were still hard at work in preservation and perhaps preparation. I shivered. Peter nodded and passed me the flask. We made the circuit, all the way around to the ragged, aslant heel-stone, and I was trying to imagine what the circle must have been like with all its pieces intact and standing, when I saw her. The woman from Salisbury Station. She was in the middle of the monument, wearing the same clothes, sitting on one-off fallen blocks, grabbed Peter's arm and pointed. He looked, lifted his shoulders against the wind, and pulled me back off path before handing me the flask. By this time I was more warm inside than out, and my mind had a tendency to wander into places where I knew I didn't belong. But I did see her. I wasn't so drunk that I was imagining it. I knew she was there. Especially when Peter said, "She's dead, you know." "Is she?" I asked calmly, and didn't object when pulled me down onto the ground where we sat cross-legged, watching that beautiful woman watching us. She was framed no between woof, the larger linteled pieces, and there was nothing behind her but the circle and the sky. We heard no cars, no buses, no planes passed overhead. Is she really, indeed? He looked at me sideways. "You're not afraid?" I shrugged. "I don't think so. Good man, there are those I know who tend to feel a little threatened when they see her. Mind, she's never done anyone, but it is a bit unsettling, you've got to give it that." It was. And what was worse, I felt a dim part off me shrieking with laughter because here I was, sitting on dead grass with a dead, drunk guide, staring at a dead woman and believing every word. "A shame," I said. "It is that. What killed her? Oh, the stones. What happened? One off them fall. Winter. We passed the flask. No, nothing like that, John, nothing at all. She came here one day in a few years back it was, all alone. Sat right where she's sitting now and froze to death." "That doesn't make any sense. Surely someone would have seen her. You, maybe, or one off others." Jones shook his head. "No one, not until the next morning. It was snowing, you see, and with the fences, the road closed. No one saw her until dawn. A motorist. He called the constables in Amesbury, and they came out to fetch her. Too late, of course, frozen stiff, and make no mistake about it. She was beautiful. I still couldn't see her features clearly for the wind blowing in my eyes, but she was beautiful. Suicide? I guessed no." "The stones, you said that already." "So I did. Well, I'll say it a third time. She tried to take a piece of them. It was the stones that did it." He scoffed, and we shared the last of the drink before he pointed to someone's name spray painted on one-off monoliths' faces. "What are you thinking, man? The stones were protecting themselves." "Then why didn't they take care of the little bugger what did that?" "I didn't know," I belched. "Cute little darling, isn't she?" He said, "I think I'm in love." "Oh, yes, you might be. You might be at that." "You think so?" He nudged me with an elbow, gave me a wink. "Why don't you introduce yourself?" And he giggled. "We've already met, sort of." "Really now? You don't say. Where?" "At the station. The train station in Salisbury." I saw her on the platform, and she smiled at me. Peter sighed with delight. "Ah, so she's getting around at last. It's nice. I'd hate to think of her being stuck out here all the time." A sudden gust nearly shoved me over, and my head cleared for an instant. "Jesus," I said, "we're talking about a damned ghost." "Penny Daye," he replied. "What?" "Penny Daye, that's her name." You should at least know her name if you're going to make remarks. I scrambled unsteadily to my feet and stood over him. Peter, sober up, for God's sake. I passed a hand over my eyes, took a deep breath, and looked again. She was still there, smiling at me. Jesus, I whispered. Peter hiccuped, wanted to clout him over the head then, kick at him, force him to admit that he was playing a marvelous and certain, well-executed joke on me. But he only burst into cackling laughter and rolled onto his back, his cap spinning away in the wind, the flask bouncing free on the grass. I waved at him disgustedly and started for the circle, watching the woman as her smile broadened and she adjusted her coat primly over her knees. When I reached the restraining rope, I stepped over it, barely thinking that I might be laying myself open for a hell of a big fine, and ignored Peter's sudden shout-off warning, for which office I didn't know. She winked and one hand lifted to rest against her cheek, an invitation to dance if I ever saw one. Peter yelled again as I passed under the lintel. I turned and grinned at him, swayed when the wind touched me, swayed again when it stopped. And when I turned back, she was gone. I nearly fell in my haste to get to where she'd been sitting, and did fall once I reached it, by snaring my foot in a depression hidden in tangled grass. My hands flew out to catch me, and I still came up against the stone hard with my chest, momentarily knocking the air from my lungs. My eyes teared, my ribs protested, and it was several gasping minutes before I was able to straighten up and look around. She was gone, so was Peter, and suddenly I was too tired to chase after either one of them. 2 mana drinks, 2 mana ears, 2 mana disappointments, off which this had to be the last straw. At that moment there was a rage I didn't think I had in me, and I didn't care if anyone saw what I was doing. I hoisted myself up and sat there, ankles crossed, hands in my lap, looking out over the plain and listening to the wind, watching the light vanish, watching the shadows grow out of the stones, and hearing the aged voices that cling to the air. Filled with angritars and angry questions I have seen myself shed and heard myself ask whenever I turn on my light, and there's no one home but me. I think there's a hint of snow in the air. Voices in fault, melancholy, telling me now, as they have told Penny Daye and all the others before her, that if I could do to the world what I believed the world had done to me, I will not have to stay long. All I need is one person, one woman, perhaps finding her on the bus or at the station or on a corner. One woman to smile at, one woman who knows what it's like to be alone. He's dead, you know, Peter will say. A woman to love me fleetingly, to cherish me briefly, dream off me just once in a large empty bed, froze to death right where he's sitting, to lure to my side because that's all there is left. Stones did it. It made me smile, as it had made her smile before she brought me to the place where the stones held me fast, the stones. It brought a color to my cheeks I haven't had since I was a child, a color I would take with me, as she had, to find me. It's the color of the weak and the meek, and those who suffer for romance, because romance has no heart. It's Penny Daye's color. It's the color of revenge.